Hello class, I hope you all are taking very good care of yourself and doing your studies as well. Well, in the previous video lectures, we were studying about nutrition, okay? And in nutrition, primarily, we have seen nutrition in plants and then in unicellular organisms and finally in humans. Now, as part of human nutrition, we have seen how the complex organic compounds which we eat as food is broken down into simple compounds, that is the process of digestion, okay, and then these simple compounds are absorbed into our body by the help of microvilli in the small intestine, and then these absorbed simple molecules are used for either producing energy or for raw materials. Okay, that was the part of assimilation. Well, so the nutrition actually, the whole process of nutrition provides you these simple compounds, right? Today we are going to start the next topic of your chapter called life processes, and we are going to study about the next life process, that is respiration. Now, this whole process is about how we can oxidize the absorbed simple food molecules to produce energy in the form of ATP. Well, so if we have to define respiration, we define it as an amphibolic process by which the simple food molecules are oxidized to produce energy in the form of ATP. Okay, in the form of ATP. Now, what is ATP? Okay, so if we have to study ATP, you know this ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate, right? And if I have to draw a diagram to show it, it should be something like this. Okay, can you see there are 3 phosphate groups and the energy is locked in these phosphate groups, in these phosphate bonds, okay? So energy is locked in these bonds, okay? Great. So this ATP is considered as the energy currency of the cell. That is, you take ATP as small batteries, or you can take it as the, currency coins. Suppose you have a 10 rupees coin, right? Now, you can use this 10 rupees coin for, buying things worth rupees 10 or less than that. Similarly, ATP is energy rich compound inside your cell, and the cell can use one ATP to get things done of equivalent energy. Okay, so suppose a cell has to do a work which is worth like 100 units of energy, then it has to give 100 ATPs, considering every ATP has 1 unit of energy. Getting it? Well, and therefore we consider ATP as the energy currency of the cell, and this energy is present in these bonds between phosphate. So what happens when ATP is there in the cell? The bond between the two phosphate, especially the terminal phosphate, is broken down, and as this bond is broken down, the energy between these bonds is released, and this energy is used for the work. Okay, great. So ATP. Now, second thing in this, or the second word, is called amphibolic, right? We have said that the respiration is amphibolic process. Now, what is amphibolic process? You know metabolism, right? That is the sum total of all chemical reactions going within a cell or an living organism is called metabolism. And you know these reactions can be of two types, that is catabolism and anabolism. Catabolism, याद रखने के लिए, काटना means a kind of metabolism in which some molecule is broken down. That is catabolism. Anabolism, if some new molecules are formed, then anabolism. Okay, now catabolism and anabolism both are part of metabolism. Okay, so in some metabolic reactions, molecules are broken down, only broken down. We call such reaction as catabolic reaction. If in another type of metabolic reaction, something is synthesized, manufactured, formed, then we call it anabolic reaction or anabolism. If there is a process in which, metabolic process, in which both catabolism and anabolism is happening, then we call such a process amphibolic or amphibolism. Okay, now how it happens, let us see here in the case of respiration. In respiration, the simple molecule, say for example, I'm taking it glucose. Okay, for example, I'm taking here glucose. The glucose molecule is oxidized and it's broken down into carbon dioxide. So it is what? Catabolic reaction. At the same time, during this process, ATP is synthesized. That is what? Anabolism. So during respiration, catabolism and anabolism both are happening, and hence this whole process is called what? Amphibolic process. Okay, great. So amphibolic process is a process in which both catabolic and anabolic reaction occurs. Okay, reaction occurs. Okay, great. Okay, so this is respiration. Well, so in respiration, we are going to oxidize the food molecule to produce energy. Say, for example, you all have studied about this process where glucose, C6H12O6, is oxidized in the presence of oxygen to produce CO2, right? At the same time, a lot of energy is produced. Can you see? And this energy is in the form of ATP. Right? So what is happening? See, the food that you ate, say for example, you ate potatoes. Now potato contained starch. Starch was a complex molecule because it was a polymer of glucose. In digestion, this polymer was broken down, this complex molecule was broken down into its simpler form, that is again into a single molecule of glucose, right? Matlab individual glucose molecules. And then these individual glucose molecules were absorbed into your bloodstream. Through bloodstream, this glucose was distributed to each and every cell of your body. Now inside the cell occurs the process of respiration, and there in the presence of oxygen, this glucose, see, this glucose, this is glucose, right? C6H12O6, sorry, glucose. Okay, this glucose is oxidized because you are adding oxygen to it, correct? Is oxidized to produce energy in ATP. This is what? Respiration. And this is how your each and every cell gets energy from the food you ate. Okay, so during the process of nutrition, the energy was not released, not at all, no. It was only broken down into simpler forms. The energy was released during the process of respiration. Okay, keep it in mind. During digestion, energy is utilized to break the complex molecules into simpler one. Okay, during respiration, the energy is released. Okay, great. याद रखिएगा इस चीज को. Now, you all have already studied that respiration is of two types, right? Respiration is of two types, that is aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. Let me do it here for you. So respiration can be two types, aerobic and anaerobic. Correct? Now, what are these? We will see in detail, but Let me tell you one another thing, that if respiration is happening, there will be production and production of some or the other gaseous material, right? So mostly in most of the type of respiration, gas is evolved, CO2 is evolved. Okay, however, it is not mandatory. In some kind of respiration, gas is not evolved. Okay, let us see. So if we are talking about respiration, and it is of two types, aerobic and anaerobic, right? We see that aerobic respiration is a type of respiration in which O2 is utilized. Okay, O2 is necessary. Okay, without oxygen, this reaction will not occur. This type of respiration will not occur. Now, how it happens? If we see through equation, it is like C6H12O6. In the presence of O2, it is broken down into 6CO2 plus 6H2O plus ATP. How much of ATP? 38 or 36 ATP. Okay, 38 or 36 ATP. How much oxygen is required? Can you balance this whole equation? See, there is 6 oxygen here on this side, but here it is 12 and 6, 18. So 6. So 6 to the 12 plus 6, 18. Here on the left hand side, 18 on the right hand side. Correct? Very well. So this is the basic equation of aerobic respiration. Now in this process, can you see two things are required, or two gaseous products are required. One, oxygen, which is a gaseous molecule, is required, and CO2 is formed. It needs to be released. So there are two gaseous molecules involved in this reaction. One is O2 and the other one is CO2. Great. And therefore you require O2 for this reaction, and you need to remove CO2 after this reaction. Correct? And this is what we see in case of breathing, right? When you breathe air, you take oxygen. This oxygen is actually required by your cells for doing this aerobic respiration, correct? And as a result of this, CO2 is formed in each and every cell. That CO2 again comes through blood into your lungs, and then you have to release it through exhalation into the atmosphere. Correct? Great. So this we will see later on. Now let's talk about anaerobic respiration. Now anaerobic respiration is also known as fermentation. Okay, anaerobic respiration is also known as fermentation, and it is of two types. It is further of two types. What are they? These are called alcoholic fermentation, alcoholic fermentation, and this is called lactic fermentation. Okay, so alcoholic fermentation and lactic fermentation. Now what happens? Now alcoholic fermentation occurs in the absence of O2, in the absence of O2, whereas lactic fermentation occurs in the lack, okay, lack of oxygen. See, there is a difference in the two things. When we say absence, there is no O2 as well. No O2. So alcoholic fermentation always occurs in anaerobic conditions, okay, where there is no oxygen. But lactic fermentation occurs when there is scarcity of oxygen. Okay, so the organism which show, or the cells which show lactic fermentation, they primarily do the aerobic respiration. But if there is not enough oxygen, then they will do the lactic fermentation. So there is lack, कमी है. Alcoholic fermentation में ऑक्सीजन चाहिए ही नहीं, absence. Okay, so there is difference between these two terms. याद रखिएगा इसको. Now, in case of alcoholic fermentation, what happens is, let us see here, the glucose C6H12O6 is converted into ethanol plus CO2 plus ATP, that is energy. Whereas in case of lactic fermentation, C6H12O6, that is glucose, is converted into lactic acid plus ATP. There is no production of CO2. Can you see? So why I am showing these two reactions? That remember, in case of lactic fermentation, none of the gaseous molecules are required or formed. Okay, so there is no involvement of any gaseous product or molecule, right? No gas. Lactic acid, ATP, nothing is gaseous. But in case of alcoholic fermentation, O2 is not required, but CO2 is produced, and this CO2 needs to be released into the atmosphere, right? Similarly, in case of aerobic, O2 is required and CO2 is to be released. So out of 3 different type of respirations, two have involvement of gaseous products. The lactic fermentation has no involvement of any gaseous molecule. Okay, great. Now, if an organism is doing aerobic respiration or it is doing alcoholic fermentation, in both the cases, the organism will produce CO2 as a byproduct, right? And this CO2 we can detect. And actually detecting this CO2 is a kind of detection of respiration. Okay, so let us do an activity to see how we can detect this CO2 produced during respiration. Okay, so let's do this activity. Well, these activities are also there in your NCERT book, so it is important for you, and that's why we are going to discuss it here. Okay, let's see. Well, let me first shrink it a bit to make some room. Well, so activity number 1, let us see. Activity 1. Now in this activity, what you have to do is you take 2 test tubes. Okay, you take 2 test tubes, test tube A and test tube B. Okay, now in both these test tubes, what we are going to fill is lime water. Okay, we are going to fill lime water. Now what is lime water? Lime water is nothing but calcium hydroxide. Okay, so we have filled lime water in these 2 test tubes. Now we know that the lime water, that is CaOH2, when reacted with CO2 or in presence of CO2, it reacts with CO2 to form CaCO3 plus what? H2O, water. Correct? Now, so we know that the lime water is converted into, calcium carbonate. Okay, calcium carbonate. And calcium carbonate is milky in color. So this will give milky color. So this lime water is transparent solution, but calcium carbonate is milky. So what is the principle of this reaction? See, in lime water, if you pass carbon dioxide, the carbon dioxide will react with lime water to form calcium carbonate. And because of formation of calcium carbonate, the color of this liquid will turn into white. So it becomes milky in color. It looks like milky white. Okay. So if the lime water turns milky, it shows the presence of CO2. Okay. Now this information we can use to test the production of CO2 by any chemical reaction, particularly respiration. Okay. So in first activity, we are trying to see if the exhaled air that we produce after respiration, does it have CO2 or not? Okay, great. So to do that, what we are doing is, in this second test tube, we are going to put a pipe. Okay, and in this pipe, we are going to exhale. So we will take this pipe and we will exhale the air, right? So exhale. In the second pipe, what we will do as a control, we will either through a syringe or through a पिचकारी, you take the atmospheric air and bubble it, है ना? तो बाहर जो हवा आप ले रहे हो, सांस ले रहे हो जिस हवा को, वो हवा आप लो और इस टेस्ट ट्यूब में लगा करके इस पिचकारी से इसमें सपोज करो यहाँ पे मैं एक पिचकारी बना देता हूँ. ओके, इस पिचकारी से आप इसमें पंप कर दो इस एयर को. ठीक है. What you will find? You will find that the solution B, you know, in test tube B, the solution will immediately turn into milky. Okay, but A will not. It will take some time. क्यों? क्योंकि मिल्की होने के लिए it requires a lot of CO2. Now that much CO2 is not present in atmospheric air. Therefore, it will take some time. But in your exhaled air, it contains a relatively high concentration of CO2. So immediately this lime water will turn milky, and this shows that the exhaled air is rich in CO2. Okay, so this will turn milky, and this shows that exhaled air is rich in CO2. This means that CO2 is produced during respiration. Which respiration? Human so aerobic respiration. So this is aerobic respiration. Okay, so this is the first activity. Let us do another activity. Well, the second activity we are going to do is similar to activity 1 in principle, but this time instead of checking the exhaled air of humans, we are going to see the case of yeast. Okay, so particularly we are going to see the case of alcoholic fermentation. Okay, what we are going to do, let us see. We are going to take a test tube again. Okay, that's, let me redraw it. So we are going to take a test tube, and in this test tube again we have the lime water. This is lime water. Now on this test tube we put a cork. Let me make it with another color. So we put a cork, and in this cork we put a test tube, a bent tube. In this test tube we put a bent tube, and we connect this bent tube with another flask. Okay, now in this flask we have sugar solution. Okay, we have sugar solution plus we have yeast. Okay, now we know that yeast is going to do alcoholic fermentation. It will ferment the sugar that is C6H12O6, and it will produce CO2. When the CO2 will pass into this lime water, the lime water will turn milky. And this shows that CO2 is evolved during alcoholic fermentation. Okay, so these are the two activities. The first activity actually show the production of CO2 during aerobic respiration, and the second activity is showing the production of CO2 during alcoholic fermentation. Okay, very well. So we have seen so far that CO2 is produced in aerobic respiration as well as in alcoholic fermentation. In principle, we have also seen that CO2 is not produced during lactic fermentation. Okay, so this is it for this video lecture. In next video lecture, we are going to see in detail the aerobic respiration, alcoholic fermentation, and lactic fermentation. Okay, so stay tuned and take a very good care of yourself. With that, thank you very much. Have a good day.